Here is Matt Pearson on creating new verbs in Okuna. And it's all yours, Matt.
Are my slides showing?
Yes, we can see them here now.
Okay, very good. So yes, I'm going to talk to you about creating new verbs in Okuna today. So a little bit of an overview of the talk. So Okuna is a naturalistic art lang, an a priori art lang, that I've been working on for about 25 years or so. Many of you have heard me talk about Okuna at previous conferences. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the fact that Okuna has a series of prefixes which can attach to verb stems to derive new verbs. And in this talk, I want to give you some examples of some of these prefixes and show how they originated through grammaticalization of incorporated elements, incorporated nouns, and also incorporated subordinate verbs. And the overall goal is to provide a kind of detailed case study in how to use the already existing grammatical resources of a conlang to derive new words. So how to expand the vocabulary using the tools that you already have as an alternative to building vocabulary through just simple relexification, translation from another language, in the hopes that this might be inspiring to people. So some basics about Okuna sentence structure. So we've got default verb final word order, although the word order is fairly flexible. And we have a kind of notoriously tricky case marking system. There's case markers on subjects and objects. And there are three main cases for subjects and objects: ergative, nominative, and dative. And these cases are assigned more on more on the basis of semantic roles than traditional grammatical relations. So ergative case is generally used for agents and actors, nominative case for themes, and then dative case for a variety of different roles. In the grammar of Okuna, I kind of group these together and call these delimiters. So they include things like a recipient, endpoint in an event of motion or transfer of force, a path traversed by an object, or a patient in an event of creation or consumption. And I'll give you some examples of these. So here are some sentences of Okuna to show you ergative marking on agents and nominative marking on themes. If you look at the transitive sentence first, Sakyal mahitole lima, Sakyal opens the door. You see that Sakyal, the agent, appears in the ergative case, and hitol, door, appears in the nominative case. And then if you want to say something like the door opens, you just use hitole in the nominative. So hitole lima, the door opens, because it's still a theme. Whereas if you want to say something like Sakyal dances, Sakyal is the agent of the dancing event, so you would use ergative there. So we have Sakyal mahosta. And a lot of ergative natlangs show patterns like this as well. Some examples of dative marking. So dative marking appears on recipients. So in something like ihaiki une moita, the woman receives a letter, woman is going to be in the dative case, or in a ditransitive clause, like Sakyal sends a letter to the woman, Sakyal maihaiki une lasta, again, woman will be in the dative case. So that's kind of, pretty straightforward for dative. But we also get dative marking on certain kinds of patients and recipients of force. So in events like reading, you can think of the reading event as sort of consuming or traversing the book in a kind of metaphorical way, and dative case is used for that in Okuna. So Sakyal reads the book would be Sakyal mahal maitala, and you also use dative case for sort of the recipients of force. So in something like Sakyal ma palahtai gata, Sakyal hits the tree. The tree is kind of the endpoint of the hitting event, and so that gets dative case. And then sort of simple goals and paths of motion tend to be in the dative as well. So in Sakyala sikunoyeta, Sakyal goes to the river, or Sakyala sikunoitisa, Sakyal crosses the river. River again would be in the dative case because it's a goal or a path of motion. Now I want to talk to you about a phenomenon in Okuna called pseudoincorporation. This is also something that we find in certain natlangs. So in pseudoincorporation, a nominative, dative, or ergative noun phrase gets replaced by a noun phrase that is unmarked for case. And where this unmarked noun phrase is non-referential. So it doesn't pick out a particular participant in the event, but more like a type of participant. Here's an example of pseudoincorporation. So we have a simple transitive sentence in the first example. Sakyal mahal mai talai. Sakyal is reading the book. We've seen that example already. It's also permissible, though, to drop the dative case marker from book and just have sakyalma halmai talai. And the meaning of this is something like Sakyal is reading a book or Sakyal is reading books, although maybe a kind of more literal translation might be something like Sakyal is book reading or Sakyal is doing some book reading. So here, halma, book, doesn't refer to a specific entity that you could point to. The sentence is more indicating the type of thing that Sakyal is reading. Now, this unmarked noun phrase forms a syntactic unit with the verb. Even though it's written as a separate orthographic word, it's functioning as a single syntactic unit with the verb. And one way we can show that is that the unmarked noun phrase has to immediately precede the verb. So they cannot be separated from each other by intervening words. Whereas nominative, dative, and ergative marked noun phrases can be separated from the verb. So if you want to say something like Sakyal is still reading the book, the word for still is ema, and the kind of normal position for that is in front of the verb. So you get Sakyalma halmai ema italai. But if you want to say, if you have the unmarked noun halma, that has to come immediately before the verb. And so ema has to precede it. So you get Sakyalma ema halma italai. And if I try to put ema in between halma and italai, that would be ungrammatical. Now, these incorporated noun phrases have a number of different functions in Okuna. So in the example that I've already shown you, the incorporated noun phrase is replacing a dative argument. And the function here is to name a kind of generic type of patient or goal. So again, Sakyal mahalmai italai, Sakyal could be translated as Sakyal is reading a book or Sakyal is reading books, but maybe it's more literally something like Sakyal is book reading. An incorporated noun phrase can also replace a nominative argument. And here that names a generic kind of theme. So take a sentence with an unincorporated nominative like Sakyal mayase ikei ukche. Sakyal gave the food to the dog. So here yase, the nominative form of food, is kind of referring to some specific quantifiable portion of food. If I instead replace that with the unmarked noun yase, which has to immediately precede the verb, then we get Sakyal maike yasoche, which is literally something like Sakyal food gave to the dog, which is kind of the way you would say Sakyal fed the dog. So here I don't have any particular food in mind. That's just kind of the type of thing. An incorporated noun phrase can also replace an ergative argument to name a generic type of agent or causer. So compare a sentence like Kotoi tohawatma laisnen toke. The house was just destroyed by the blaze. Here, tohawatma, the ergative noun phrase, refers to a specific large fire. But you could also say kotoi laisne tohawat toke, which is literally the house just big fire destroyed, right? Or the house was just blaze destroyed. It just means the house was destroyed in a blaze. And I'm not sort of, I don't have a particular fire in mind. That's just the kind of thing that caused the destruction. Okay, so an incorporated noun phrase can also be added to a clause that already has an ergative agent and a dative patient. And in this case, the extra noun phrase names a generic instrument or sometimes the type of material from which something is made, sort of depending on the verb. So you could take a sentence like Sakyalma makai hane, Sakyal cut the meat or cut into the meat. And I could add an unmarked pseudo-incorporated instrument noun in front of cut, kamal, knife, to give what's literally Sakyal knife cut the meat, or Sakyal knife cut into the meat. So kamal here names the type of instrument that's used. In this example, here the unmarked noun phrase names a type of material that's used. So Sakyal makopoi woste is literally Sakyal made a pot, and pot is in the dative case because it's the patient here. It's the thing that is being created by the shaping event. I could add sute, clay, to this sentence to give Sakyal makopoi sute woste, which is literally something like Sakyal clay shaped to a pot. And that's sort of how you say Sakyal made a pot out of clay, or he shaped clay into a pot. Okay, so why am I droning on about pseudo-incorporation? What does this have to do with verb derivation? Well, there's a process, a historical process of phonological reduction and grammaticalization in the history of Okuna, I decided, such that an incorporated noun can fuse with the following verb and it gets reanalyzed as a prefix. So I mentioned earlier that these incorporated nouns form a syntactic unit with the following verb. They're separate phonological elements, but they form a syntactic unit with the verb. And what's happening here is that through language change, they form a phonological unit with the verb as well. So I'll give you some examples of that. So you could take a sentence like Sakyalma Geoli Mulpate, and that's how you would say Sakyal covered the chair with a cloth. It's literally Sakyal cloth covered the chair. And what happened at a certain point in the history of the language is that mul and pata kind of fused together to give mupata, with a little bit of semantic shift to give the word that means to clothe or get dressed. So Sakyalma mupatle is how you would say Sakyal got dressed. If you want to make it transitive and say Sakyalma paya mupatle, that's how you say Sakyal dressed the child. But you can see that it's kind of semi-transparently derived from Sakyal covered the child with cloth, right? Okay, so this is sort of a source of prefixes that can be used to derive new verbs from old verbs. Here are some more examples of incorporated nouns becoming verb prefixes. So the noun xas, which means salt, merged at a certain point with the verb meaning cover, pata, to give xapata, which means to coat with salt, or to salt, like to salt meat. Xas also merged with landa, preserve, to give xalanda, which means to cure something or to preserve it with salt. We also get situations where a noun that names a theme merges with a verb. So him means interior, eka means be empty, and they merge together to give himeka, which means to be hollow, to be empty inside. And then finally, inya, which means eyes, merged with tuma, which means to block something or to impair something. And you get intuma, which is the word for to be blind. Okay, so some of these prefixes have become fairly productive in the language. One such prefix is na, which means to do something with your hands. And this derived historically from a noun nawa, which actually means the palm of your hand, that underwent pseudo-incorporation and then full incorporation into the verb. So from something like ekpa, meaning to bear or to hold or to take, you can get nakpa, which means to carry in your hands. From kahta, which just means generically to hit something or to strike something, you get nakahta, which means hit with your hands, so to punch or to slap. Kacha means to make a sharp sound. Nakacha means to clap or applaud. Pesa is to brush or sweep something. And so napesa is to brush something with your hands. So that's how you say to strum a musical instrument. Chaisa means to raise or elevate, and nachoisa is to pick up something. And then here's my favorite, tupa means to walk. And so natupa, it doesn't mean to walk with your hands, literally, it means to crawl on your hands and knees. So again, there's been some semantic change. We also have a bunch of these that are formed with so, derived from the word sot, meaning word. And this is to do things with words. So from gasta, to go against or oppose, we have sokasta, which means to argue. So that's literally to go against somebody by using words, is to argue with them. Sila means to stretch something taut. So sosila means to exaggerate. So you stretch taut with words. Moita means to receive. So moita is to hear news of something. Nyokta is to return. And so nyokta means to return something with words, to respond or to answer. Wata is to stop. So wata is to stop somebody's words. So that's to interrupt someone. And then wosta, we saw that word earlier, means to give shape to something. So wosta is to give shape to something using words. So that's to describe or explain something. And then from minu, mind, we have a bunch of verbs that are formed with the prefix min, which means to do something in your mind or with your mind. So we get some cognitive verbs from this. So from heba, to go along or to follow a path, we get miheba, which means to ponder. Hoda means slow. Mihoda, to be bored or lethargic. Hala means to pass by. Mihala would mean to pass by something with your mind, which is to overlook something or ignore it. Gaitsa is to talk about. Mikaitsa is to think about. Thinta means to be nimble. So mithinta means to be nimble with your mind. So that's to be smart or clever. Tega is to get or fetch or acquire. And so mitega is to presume or infer. And then from san, which means body, you can get a bunch of words that mean to do something with your whole body. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of these, but from hota, to join or connect, we get sahota, which is to join bodies. So that's to mate or to copulate. And then laha means to release. Tsalaha means to release your body or to be released from your body, maybe. So that's to cremate. And you can look at the other examples as well. And then just for fun, I threw in some etymological mysteries here. So there's also a prefix ki, which means to do something using a sharp pointed tool. Presumably, this prefix also arose historically through grammaticalization of an incorporated noun, but that incorporated noun no longer exists in the language. So this is a kind of etymological fossil in the language. But we see it in words like kihana, to pierce or poke, from the verb to cut into. From kahta, to hit or strike, we have kikahta, which means to stab or poke or prick or jab. From taha, which means to kill something for food, to kill an animal for food, we get kitaha, which means to spear or stab or kill something with a harpoon, and so on. Maybe my favorite is untapa, means to braid or plait, and kyontapa means to braid something with sharp objects. So that's to knit. A second source of these prefixes is what are called converb constructions, which I've talked about in a previous talk at LCC. A verb in Okuna can take the suffix e to form what's called the converb form. A converb immediately precedes and modifies another verb. And when formed from a verb that denotes an action, the converb names the means by which the event named by the main verb is carried out. So for example, from the verb lihka, meaning to cut or sever, you can form the converb lihke, which we might translate as by means of cutting. And you can then take that verb and place it in front of another verb to modify it. So from tepa, which means to remove or to strip something from the outside of something, you can form lihke tepa, which means, well, it's literally to remove from the outside of something by means of cutting, which is how you say to cut off something, to sever something from something else in Okuna. So let's look at some examples of converb constructions. So from a verb tanga, push, as in sakyal manaka itankai, sakyal is pushing the rock or pushing on the rock. We can form tanga, which means by means of pushing. So you can have something like sakyal maloin tange putte, which is sakyal pushed over the cauldron. But it's literally sakyal overturned the cauldron by means of pushing or by using a pushing action. From a verb like yanta, jump, as in hiwama yante, the horse jumped, we can form yante by means of jumping, which could combine with a verb that names like a trajectory of motion. So you could get something like hiwa mutoi yante tise, the horse jumped over the fence, and it's literally the horse went over the fence or the horse traversed the fence by means of jumping. Like an incorporated noun phrase, as we discussed earlier, the converb forms a unit with the verb that it immediately precedes and modifies. And this is shown in a number of different ways. For example, the converb and the verb that follows it cannot be separated by intervening elements. They can't be separated by the negative scope marker, for example. Normally, the negative scope marker attaches directly to the verb. So if you want to say the horse didn't go over the fence, it's hiwa mutoi ntisuma, where the initial N there is kind of a negative marker. But if you have a converb modifying the main verb, then that prevents the negative scope marker from attaching to the main verb. And so instead you use kind of a free form of that scope marker, nse. And so you get hiwa mutoi nse yante tisuma, the horse didn't jump over the fence. And it would be ungrammatical to say hiwa mutoi yante tisuma with the negative marker attached to tlisuma, because that would violate the rule that says that yante and tlisuma have to form a unit. Okay, so as with incorporated nouns, these converbs, since they form a syntactic unit with the following verb, can undergo phonological reduction and grammaticalization to become verb prefixes. So from something like, so pohua means to burst, kate means by means of hitting. So kate pohua is literally burst by means of hitting something, to cause something to burst by means of hitting it. That can get reanalyzed, where kate kind of undergoes phonological reduction to become just a prefix ka, and we get kapohwa, which is to burst by hitting. And then there's some semantic change that's happened over there, where rather than burst by hitting, it comes to mean burst violently or burst suddenly, and from that we get the meaning to explode or to rupture. And this ka prefix, meaning something like forcefully or suddenly or unexpectedly, can then be used to form a variety of different verbs. From acha, meaning to approach, you can form kahacha, which is to lunge at or thrust. Etymologically, it means to approach by means of hitting, but what's happened over time is that the ka prefix has come to mean not literally by means of hitting, but just violently or suddenly or unexpectedly. So it means to approach somebody violently or unexpectedly. That's to lunge at them or to thrust. From helta, pull, we get kahelta, which is like to pull hard or to yank on something. From patla, smother, or cover, we get kapatla, to smother. From sasa, meaning to find or encounter, we get kasasa, which means to stumble on unexpectedly. From sosa, throw, we get kasosa, which means to hurl or throw hard. And then the word for drown is katsuba, which is formed from the word tsuba, which means to submerge yourself in liquid. And so it's sort of literally to submerge in liquid or to be submerged in liquid in a violent or sudden or forceful or unexpected way. Another example, so from the converb ekpe, meaning by means of being held or by means of holding, we form the prefix ke. So from tsaiba, meaning submerged, we can get ketsaiba, which means to hold something underwater or to keep something submerged in liquid. So it's literally to have something be submerged by means of holding it. And we get this ke prefix showing up in a lot of other verbs as well. I won't go through all of these. But the first one is keluma, to hold open or to sustain, comes from luma, to be open. From mainka, be fixed in place, you can form ke mainka, which means to hold something in place or to support it. And then we get some metaphorical extensions of this. From mokta, meaning to come home, we get kemokta, which means to welcome or invite. This is maybe literally to bring someone home, to carry someone home is to invite them into your house. And from belta, wait for, we get belta, to anticipate, and so on. Like with the key prefix that I mentioned earlier, which presumably derived from an earlier incorporated instrument noun that is no longer attested in the language, there are also some mystery prefixes that presumably derive historically from converbs, but the original verb is no longer there. There's a prefix un in the language that is used to form verbs that refer to a kind of circular motion or an action directed inward or towards oneself. This might be related to the verb umma, which means to move to one side, but if so, there's been some semantic change there. So from hista, meaning to lead, you get unkista, which means to lead in circles or to confuse someone. And from hloma, meaning to add, you get unploma, which means literally to add on to itself. And that's how you say to multiply in this language. And there are a few other examples here that I won't go through in the interest of time. Continuing on with converb constructions, there's more uses of this converb construction than I've mentioned previously. Note that Okuna does not have adjectives. Instead, properties and attributes are expressed by stative verbs. So there's no adjective meaning tall or big, but there is a verb toha, meaning to be big. And when one of these stative verbs appears in the converb form, it can modify another verb to indicate the manner in which the event denoted by that verb takes place. So this is sort of a similar function to manner adverbs like quickly. So from a verb like gyota, be quick, as in hastine gyota, the deer is quick, you can form a converb gyota, quickly. It's literally something like by means of being quick. So hastinma gyote gyompai, the deer is running quickly, is literally something like the deer is running in a quick manner. Yeah. Or another example, gela means to be together in a reciprocal relationship. So sakyalka elime akame gelat, sakyal and elim are siblings. It's literally they are in a mutual relationship as siblings. You can form the converb gele, meaning together or mutually, as in sakyalka elimna satai gele tokit. Sakyal and elim fixed the roof together. They fixed the roof by means of or in the manner of being in a mutual relationship. As with the eventive converbs, the stative ones can also undergo grammaticalization, and you get new prefixes from this. So from something like gele yasa, to eat together, the gele can undergo reduction to give a new prefix gel, and we get the verb gelyasa, meaning to eat together or to have a meal. And so a number of verbs in Okuna are formed by adding this gel prefix to an already existing verb, where the new verb has a sense of mutual or reciprocal action. So ehwa means to have or to own. Gelehwa means to own jointly or collectively. Hutopa means to be to depend on. So keshutoba means to be interdependent. Mista means to turn or to change. Gelmista means literally to turn to each other. And that's how you say to reach consensus in this language, or you turn together or you change together is how you reach consensus in this language. And then skipping down a couple, ukcha means give, gelukcha means to trade or exchange, to give things to each other.
Sorry, Matt, I just want to give you a 3-minute warning there if you want to take any questions.
Got it. I've also got some examples with a prefix intensely that's formed from the verb dama, be strong or mighty. And a few other examples. C is another of these mystery prefixes that presumably derived from a manner converb that forms some verbs that have the sense of briefly or abruptly or with minimal effort. So from gata, to hit or strike, we get sikata, which means to jab or to prod or to poke, so on. And then a favorite verb of mine in the language, lima means to open or ignite. Silima means to quickly open and then close again. But it also means to flash or to glint. I want to end by mentioning that there are some natlang analogs, that's hard to say, for these manner and instrument morphemes that I have derived in Okuna. We get these in some languages of North America, for example. In the Hokan language, Atsugewi, that's spoken in California, we have a variety of prefixes that are used to express things like the instrument or cause with which an event takes place. So we have ones that mean using your hands, using your feet, by means of the wind blowing on something, by means of a pounding or chopping or batting action, by means of cutting with a knife, by means of poking, piercing, or propping something up with a long, thin object. And here's an example of a verb in Atsugewi that includes one of these manner prefixes. So this is how in Atsugewi you say, he tracked up the house with muddy feet. So the root here is stak, which means icky material is in motion. It's basically what the verb means. And then you have some directional markers that attach to the end of it into here, so inside where we are, so into the house. And then you have a manner prefix that, or an instrument prefix that's attached to that using your feet. So this is literally something like, he moved icky material into here by using his feet. And that's how in Atsugewi you say, he tracked up the house with mud. And then a final example of a language that has prefixes like this. Nez Perce, or Nimiputimt, which is a Sahaptian language, has manner of motion morphemes that can combine with a verb. Lasa in Nez Perce means to go up, to ascend, And if you add the prefix ko to that to give kolasa, that means to go up by means of galloping. So hikolasaya is he galloped up. So it's literally something like he galloping ascended. And there are a bunch of other morphemes in this language that express manner of motion by walking, by running, by slithering, by using a cane. So this particular construction that I innovated for Okuna is also found in a number of natlangs as well. So maybe that gives some credence to this way of doing things.